Welcome to Lorenzo Turner Network. Here you're going to get a plethora of information. Right now I want you guys to practice doing something that you normally don't do. Look at Facebook in a whole nother way for informational purposes that can actually help your life. Man, do me a favor, man. Men, stop listening for a while. Start listening to reality, things that make sense. You know what I mean? So as you go through this video, open your eyes, open your ears. I just want to encourage men to speak up. You say, what for? What do I need to speak up for? What is there to speak up about? So what's going on? It's like it's a epidemic. It don't matter what your background is, your faith, your culture. There's an epidemic in the land, and men have become very silent. So just go with me. Follow me over here for a little bit.
Bruises and blemishes everywhere. Just remember this through the prayers and rebuild me. My prayers and rebuild me. Said rebuild me. Don't forget about me. Just rebuild me. For the broken, rebuild me. For the damaged, rebuild me. For the bruised, rebuild me. This one. For the hurt, rebuild me. Everybody say rebuild me. From your heart say rebuild me. From your soul rebuild me. I know it hurts, but say rebuild me. Listen, listen. It's not over, say rebuild me. There's a renewing in the air, rebuild me. It's never too late for God to rebuild me. Everything that I've done wrong, rebuild me. Father, I'm standing with all I know, with nowhere else to go. I'm standing in the need of prayer. If you hear me, let me know you're there. Come and fix me. Fix me. If you don't do it, it won't be done. Forgive me for what I've done. Remix. Jam. Remix.
All right. Get the picture yet? This is bigger than Ebola. God bless those souls and those people who have endured losses through this Ebola epidemic. But this epidemic is definitely bigger than Ebola. So pay attention to this. This is a little bit more serious than Ebola. This is a worldwide epidemic that every culture is actually going through. And men, we seem to have the same problem. So if you can, sit down with your wife and your girlfriend, or other females in your family, whoever. Sit down with them and watch this video. I'm telling you, stay with me. Follow me on this. Everyone's talking about Ebola, but nobody's talking about the liberation of men. Follow me. I'm telling you, this is going to open your eyes. You're going to feel a lot better once you see what you didn't learn. Once you
You know, there's been a tremendous rise of women's violence against men from 1985 to 1991, and we here at Rolanda are always concerned about violent family situations, and that's why we thought it was important to do this story. I like the points that we've been making. It doesn't matter who's violent. If your home is violent, then we've got to help. There are currently fewer than 6 shelters for battered men in the United States. And we're about to introduce you to the man who helped found the very first one. Where are you, George? George Gilliland. He founded the very first one, the very first shelter for men in the United States. You're joining us live via satellite from St. Paul, Minnesota. Thanks for joining us, George.
Thank you for having me.
if you could, what the situation was before you founded the shelter. If you were a man being battered by your wife or girlfriend, where could you go? What situation were you in?
Well, you could do the same as I and many other men have done. You can spend the days and nights in your car with very little money in your pocket, or you can humiliate yourself by turning to friends or relatives and begging for a place to stay and food in your stomach if you want to. Other than that, there's virtually no place to turn to. And fortunately, I've heard some comments from some ladies in your audience that have brought that to light, whose thinking is exactly the same as mine. I am not known as a men's rights activist by those that know me and know what we do. I'm known as a man that demands nothing more than equality and the same continuum of treatment for every victim of domestic abuse. I don't care if it's a man or a woman, if they're black or white, lesbian or gay, Catholic, Protestant, Buddhist, or whatever they are. Every person that is a victim deserves the same type of treatment and compassion.
That's right.
And I think, too, that any act of abuse or assault ought to be treated equally. And as you've heard from some other people, this is not the case at all.
From the audience, George.
Just I have a statement. I'm not condoning this at all. But I have to be sympathetic to the women because women have been battered for centuries, and also murdered.
Who gets battered?
Again, I'm not condoning it. I'm not. I'm really not. I'm just saying that me as a woman, I have to be a little bit more sympathetic to my...
What difference does it make who gets battered or slapped, whether it's a male or a female? It is a serious thing.
Relationship.
I think it's important to put things into some kind of perspective. Domestic violence is about power and control. It's about a relationship where there's a whole pattern about trying to maintain power and control, very much like racism in our country. You know, those of us who are white are born into a kind of privilege just by the color of our skin, and we think that gives us a right to power. And men who batter women are born into this country thinking because they're born male they have a right to have power over, to be the king of the castle.
I think I asked you
about 3 years ago.
From the audience, please.
About power and control,
I just think it's terrible.
Charlotte, I believe I asked you about 3 years ago, where do you come off by saying that domestic violence is man's desire to control a woman, and yet 3 years ago I asked you, how do you account for domestic violence then in gay and lesbian relationships? And you dodged that question, and every other advocate has been dodging it ever since.
So it doesn't hold any water, Charlotte. I agree with her that it is about power and control, but women hit to exercise power and control and to coerce also.
And I have to say also, I think that Charlotte's approach is dangerous. I really do. Because by scapegoating men, you get men angry, so you get more male violence. And by implicitly condoning female... No, please, I'll let you finish. By implicitly condoning female violence, you get more of that. So all around, you get more violence, more victims. But you see, that's good for Charlotte because that's more money for her.
And from the audience.
Nobody is
from the audience,
violence.
I just think it's terrible how the women are so insensitive to men's pain. I know men who are abused, and it's a terrible thing. And I think Mel's skirt looks great.
How do the laws pertain to this? I want to talk to you about how the laws pertain to battered men when we come back. We'll be right back.
They've been able to disguise their abuse, I think, more cleverly than men have. Society doesn't want to believe that there are female abusers. It's easier to think it's a nasty man. Women tend to use objects, broom handles, bottles. One woman said that she was sexually abused by rose stems with the thorns still on, being stuck up. Women can be quite cruel using objects. Women
Welcome everyone to another scintillating episode on social issues presented by Sharp-Raleigh Productions. Today we will be discussing a very sensitive issue, an issue that has been swept under the rug or was never considered a national problem, an issue that is becoming more and more prominent as the traditional gender roles are changing and reversing. An issue
Today I'm talking to you about a subject that's a little sensitive. It's domestic violence in general and specifically against men. Now, many people think that that's something to laugh about or something that just doesn't happen. I can tell you that half of my VAWA cases, my abuse spouse cases, and conditional green card waivers are filed by men. Now, domestic violence against men is not necessarily as physical as you would think with a woman. Sometimes it is just as physical, but most of the time it involves financial manipulation, threats to harm him or his family, and psychological abuse and manipulation.
Who usually starts these confrontations in a relationship? Is there research for that, Dr. Ho?
Yes, there is.
Yeah, there is some research about that, Don, and actually most of the times we see that the woman is the one who aggresses first, but I think the problem is that most of the times the woman does not do as much damage physically on a man than the other way around, which is why we have this double standard. But there is research, and it shows that most of the times the women do sometimes start the altercation. They may just be pushing, but then of course then the man gets upset and then they might push back, but then that's such a bigger deal than the woman pushing in the first place because of the issues we've discussed.
I'll start with some research that most would feel was from a reputable source, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the summary of their findings as published in the American Journal of Public Health, May 2007. First, almost 24% of all relationships had some level of violence. Half of those relationships involved just one of the partners being violent, the other half were reciprocally violent. Now, in relationships where violence was perpetrated by just one person, over 70% of that was committed by the woman. Did you get that? In all relationships in that particular study, more than 7 out of 10 batterers were female. Let's look even closer at the data as it relates to relationships where both partners are violent. This half is even more interesting. The study concluded that reciprocally violent relationships were most likely to result in injuries, particularly to women. They were also a solid predictor of future repeated violence for women, but not men. In other words, women who engaged in mutual combat with men were much more likely to have a pattern of instigating repeated assaults. Men's violence was much more likely to be isolated and, contrary to the redundant assertions of feminists, not likely to be repeated. Now let me sum up those conclusions in a clearer form of English. Relationships where both are violent are more likely to result in the woman getting hurt. Those relationships are also marked by women who are much more likely than men to initiate and maintain that violence in the first place. We have a common expression for much of the men's violence in these situations. It's called hitting back. There is no real excuse for violence, ever, some would say, but there is legal and, in the belief of many, moral justification.
Who usually starts these confrontations in a relationship? Is there research for that, Dr. Ho?
Yes, there is.
Yeah, there is some research about that, Don, and actually most of the times we see that the woman is the one who aggresses first, but I think the problem is that most of the times the woman does not do as much damage physically on a man than the other way around, which is why we have this double standard. But there is research, and it shows that most of the times the women do sometimes start the altercation. They may just be pushing, but then of course then the man gets upset and then they might push back, but then that's such a bigger deal than the woman pushing in the first place because of all the issues we've discussed.
Go ahead, Philip Cook.
Yes, well, there is solid research on that, and basically if you look at some 300 published research studies that have been going on for some 30 years, they pretty much say the same thing. Half the time it's a case of mutual combat. A quarter of the time only the woman is violent, a quarter of the time only the man is violent. Half the time women strike first, half the time men do. In terms of injury, there is a greater proportion of injury to women overall when you combine mild and serious. However, when you get to the most serious forms of injury, the rates are fairly similar. Women make up for the size and weight differential, which is pretty obvious in most cases, by using weapons twice as often, or attacking when the man is unaware, such as the man who was rolled up in the bed sheets and beaten with a baseball bat, the man who was set on fire, a football player who opens the front door and gets blown away by his shotgun-wielding wife. You know, these things happen as well. So size and weight differential.
Tell.
I am a survivor.
These are the faces of domestic violence or sexual abuse. Victims no longer thought of as just women, which is why this is the new name of the former Women's Center of Southeastern Connecticut.
I am Safe Futures. I am Safe Futures.
Folks at Safe Futures say their old name was a barrier to getting men to come in for help, even after counselors had
And
met
no,
them
I'm not
at places.
insensitive to battered women. My heart goes out to any real victim. But the day I see images of bruised men on those billboards, I'll be less prone to being offended at seeing the images of beaten women. Too many of them are being propped up like the starving children you see on your TV
One time
at
she
2
was
in the
watching
morning.
this show. It was like a poor excuse for The View, and they started talking about domestic violence, right? For the 9 millionth time this year, they're talking about domestic violence, just in case, you know, you didn't get the memo.
When it comes to domestic violence, we've gotten only half the story. Male victims of domestic violence have been systematically ignored and marginalized. Most people don't even think they exist. This has happened due to advocates in the media telling half the story and only half the story. The story that's been told focuses exclusively on female victims and leaves out men and boys, even though there's an abundance of evidence from both research and clinical data that men and boys comprise a significant portion of the victims of domestic violence. When we're told half the story, we're left with a distorted view. Just imagine if you were told the story of Cinderella, but the part about the glass slipper was omitted. You'd be left with a distorted picture of the story, right? That's exactly what has happened with domestic violence. Here's a fact sheet from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, one of the nation's oldest and largest domestic violence organizations, and the voice of the 50 state domestic violence coalitions that guide domestic violence policies and services in the U.S. It's meant to teach the public about domestic violence. Notice that it clearly states that there were 1.3 million female victims of domestic violence. It refers to a research study to back up this claim. Now, let's look at the research that they used. Sure enough, we can see there were 1.3 million female victims. But wait a minute. This study, the same one that's quoted in the above fact sheet, lists both male and female victims, and it shows that there were also 835,000 male victims of domestic violence. The fact sheet never told that part of the story. Why would they leave out such an important finding? Why not state that there were 1.3 million female victims and 835,000 male victims of domestic violence? Or even total the two and say there are over 2 million victims of domestic violence in the U.S. But somehow the male half of the story is never mentioned. We never see the glass slipper. Now, the NCADV is far from the only offender using this practice. Omitting male victims of domestic violence is very common. There are an estimated 600 sites on the internet that quote the same half of the story about 1.3 million females and then say nothing about the male half. I urge you to search the phrases and see for yourself. Male victims simply don't exist according to these sites. They quote only their preferred half of the research findings. Respected researcher Murray Strauss of the University of New Hampshire's Family Research Laboratory has said that national surveys and other studies have shown equal rates of violence by men and women since as early as 1984. But this evidence is typically ignored, concealed, and often explicitly denied by the academic community. More recently, CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control, in conjunction with the National Institute of Justice and the Department of Defense, launched the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey. Now, this was touted as a landmark study that would gauge the status of domestic violence in the United States. Guess what they found? They found that 53% of the victims of interpersonal violence in the U.S. were men. Let me say that again. They found that 53% of the victims of domestic violence were men. They also found that over 40% of the victims of severe interpersonal violence were men. Look at these tables from the NISVS for domestic violence victims in the last 12 months. Table 4.1 is about the women and estimates that 4,741,000 women were victims of domestic violence in the last 12 months. Then look at Table 4.2 that shows the same stats, but for the men. It clearly estimates that 5,365,000 men were victims. Total these two and you get a little over 10 million. 5.3 million is clearly 53%. That makes men the majority of domestic violence victims, and yet all we hear is silence. In fact, to make matters worse, the only place this male majority is mentioned is in the full report. The executive summary doesn't say anything. Glass slipper. The letter to professionals doesn't say anything. Another glass slipper. The fact sheets don't say anything. Yet another glass slipper. In fact, some of these say just the opposite. They claim that women are disproportionately victims of domestic violence. The CDC is clearly telling only half the story. I've written to CDC asking for clarification, and they have yet to respond. You might be asking what happens to all these male victims. Since our domestic violence services are built for women, do men find help and services? The answer is a resounding no. Look at this chart, which shows the number of women and children who used emergency services in shelters, and then the men. Obviously, the men are not finding services when they're in need. According to the research previously noted, men are over half of the victims, and yet they are only about 2/3 of 1% of those who are getting help. Something is terribly wrong here. And what happens to these men when they do seek services? The 2011 research of Douglas and Hines shows us that when men are victims of domestic violence and they go in search of treatment to a domestic violence agency, they run into a buzzsaw. About 80% of the males were told that the services were for women only. 15% reported they were made fun of. 63% were referred to a batterer's program with the implication that the help seeker was the batterer. And 95% of the men surveyed felt that the services were biased against men. It's time that we started telling the entire story of domestic violence for both men and women. At this point, men are facing hardship and discrimination that's the result of our legislators being ignorant of half the story and funding discriminatory laws and services that are paid for by our taxes. It's time they heard the rest of the story. Please send the link to this video to your congressman and senator today and ask them just where would they send these men for help. And, as always, keep in mind, men are good.
%. Hey man, I'm really dedicating this video to men and whichever women want to, get educated or learn a little bit more on what men actually go through and see the stats, see the truth. Right now, I'm not going through the breakdown of what's going on in any individual's houses. I'm just showing the stats of violence and how it stacks up against men and what's not being said. And I'm going through the statistics of what's really happening, not necessarily arguments themselves and things like that. Just the stats that's happening to men all over the globe, between husbands and wives and girlfriends and boyfriends and things like that, of that nature. All right, so follow me, man. Here, we got stats that go back, things that we should be checking, each and every last one of us, just to find out. Stop believing everything we see on TV. That's number one. You got to stop believing every little thing you see on TV. The media's lying to you, commercials lying to you, everything's lying. So you gotta go ahead and do some research for yourself. And because I get tons of men running up to me when I'm at work at night, different times when I'm out and about, men in their 70s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and they're all telling me what they're going through with their women in their lives. Sometimes it's just close relatives that they're going through this with, aunts and uncles. In most cases, it's that girlfriend and that wife, or someone you are preparing to be your girlfriend to meet your family, to meet your mom and dad, you know. So in those cases. So, but anyway, stay with me for a little bit here. Let me go over a few things with you real quick. This is an example of the range of partner violence statistics here. In Santa Barbara, California, back in 1983, the police records indicated that perpetrators were 94% male, and perpetrators were also female, which only totaled 6% during that time. So we got these two stats here, male and female perpetrators. All right, New Zealand young adults back in 2002 was 39% male. 61% female were perpetrators. In Australia, newlyweds in 2009 approximately equal. So basically they broke off even in 2009. By that time around, these stats say that women were just as violent, just as physical, just as problematic as what we see the men are today, but yet we only see men as being perpetrators. Okay, so right here it says, best population-based study shows that 25 to 50% of all PV victims in a given year are actually men. That's right, they are actually men. Guys, you can breathe, relax. I don't care what's being told to you inside of your house. I don't care about the arguments and the fights. Stats prove for themselves. And when you show an abusive person these stats, the thing that comes next is more abuse for you. More denial, or not willing to look at it at all. So you can expect that. If you start showing this video that I put out here in dedication to men, you start showing this, you can expect this kind of stuff to happen in your houses. I'm not looking at it. You're gonna hear her tell you that's a bunch of crap. But the reality is it's out there. And the more men we get paying attention to this, the more we can start changing and standing together and realize that these things need to stop on both sides. Not just always showing that men are perpetrators. Women are princesses. Men are tyrants and beasts. Women are princesses and victims. All right, different kinds, back to different kinds of studies and back to different kinds of studies and surveys. All right, so this right here, National Crime Agency survey. The samples often include only women from shelters and police and other criminal records. Okay, they only draw on reports of violence, bias against men. So every report given is reported to the is a report given to the National Crime Agency from a victim who claims to be a victim. All right. Women victims are not asked about their own use of violence or abuse, and that's clear today. Most women are not asked, what did you do to him? How did you make him feel? What did you say to him? What did you financially try to do to him? How did you injure him? Excuse me. What is it that you've done? See, they don't ask women those kind of questions. Men are not asked about any experiences of victimizations. Sir, what happened to you? How did she make you feel? What did she do that made you feel this way? What happened? You know, for a long time, women weren't even arrested for partner violence. In many cases, men never reported it because they didn't feel it was necessary, and various reasons I don't want to get into at the moment, or didn't know, just ignorant of the fact that they should have been reporting this. You know, men, the thing is right here, you know, they say statistically men are 4 times stronger than women, but it doesn't matter. Domestic violence is domestic violence with your mouth. Just because this man does not have any injuries doesn't mean anything. Women victims are not asked about their own use of violence or abuse. See, they omit that. They purposefully leave those things out. and they turn back to the man and look at the level of violence he's given her because he's 4 times stronger than her. He might look like the Incredible Hulk. Sometimes he's just a smaller guy, and sometimes the female's a lot bigger than him, but, you know, things happen. And domestic violence is not just something that is physical. Not at all.
Saying, how come you can't ask questions? You can only ask questions about what the guy did. You can never ask about the woman. Why is that?
National Victimization Survey. Respondents mightn't see partner abuse as a crime. Men in particular don't see it as a crime if they are not injured. Okay, so you don't feel like it's a crime if this female, girlfriend, wife, hasn't necessarily injured you. She hasn't cut your skin, she hasn't cut your neck, she hasn't punched you in the face, she hasn't ran you over with the car. See, those things right there, men are ignorant to. They figure, I'm not a victim because she has not physically caused bodily harm to me. You know, I can take it. I'm a man, I can take it. Okay, so these are some of the things that it starts off with, and that help omit the fact that this violence is actually against men in a much more greater stacked detail. All right. If surveys conceptualize it as a crime, women are less likely to report committing partner abuse. Now, if we start putting this together and start reporting all those things that are actually happening to men from women, and it starts being reported as a crime, because women are thinkers. They are constantly thinking of how they can overstep, get ahead of you. They claim they want equality, but yet and still you don't see them asking you how you feel and how I did this to you to make you feel this way. They expect you to come to them and apologize for all the crap that you made come out of their mouth, or when they start becoming very vicious and maliciously attacking you. So if men were to report this more and start saying these things are abusive, more than likely their reports are going to change when it comes to actually using this against you to report domestic violence against men, or her husband, her boyfriend, her, you know, to her family members. She's being a reporter. Sometimes she's not directly saying it, but she's going to them saying that you're abusing her greatly and she's doing nothing, or just a smidgen of something happening from her, and nothing in comparison to what you're actually doing to her. And all these stats show that these are lies. And we'll get into that another time, not right now. But we just want to stick with the stats of the statistics. Okay. Questions usually asked within a context of male perpetrators, female victims. All right, we have 2 sets of questions. One set of questions is geared towards men. Another set of questions is geared towards females. Listen to what I'm saying. Based on perception of being a victim, again, biased against men. All right, so let's make her the victim. Anytime there's a phone call or somebody calls that there's a domestic going on in your house because they heard it, or just because of the fact that a woman reports a domestic, they automatically have a set-up system for the woman and a set-up system for the man. Man perpetrator, woman princess, Cinderella. She didn't do anything. So they go straight to him and they, why did you do this to her? Why did you do that? You're under arrest. You know, these things you should have never done. Why'd you do that? There's no reason for that. But they never go to her with the same kind of treatment. They actually go to her and say, honey, sweetie, are you okay? You want to sit down and talk about this? You want some water? You want some cake? Because she's crying and she's a female. So when those things are insinuated and all these things being
They say the key to a good relationship is communication and trust. But according to a new game, the key is beating your boyfriend to a bloody pulp every time he steps out of line.
Every year, there are more than 800,000 serious cases of women abusing men.
Boyfriend Trainer for iOS and Android takes you through a series of relationship lessons, like girlfriends don't like their boyfriends to look at other girls. About time he got the message. But instead of explaining your feelings in a calm and rational manner, your task is to slap him silly.
I'll leave it to the attack to make their own call. In fairness now, it has to be pointed out that this one study, for many reasons, including methodology, can't fairly be generalized to the entire population. And one study alone is easy enough to dispute, even from a sound source. So let's look at 100 more. Professor John Archer is a psychologist at the University of Central Lancashire and the esteemed head of the Aggression Research Group at the same university. In his analysis of 100 British and American studies, he concludes that women are more likely than men to initiate violence in their relationships and are more likely to be aggressive more frequently. He also addresses the myth that women are only violent as a matter of self-defense by reporting that 29% of female college students admitted to physically attacking their boyfriends when no threat was perceived. I know feminists won't be convinced by this, nor will they be by several hundred more studies, but let's look at them anyway. Professor Martin S. Fibert of the California State University Psychology Department conducted an analysis of 249 scholarly investigations, 194 empirical studies, and 55 reviews regarding domestic violence. The aggregate sample size in the reviewed studies was over 250,000 people. Fibert's conclusion? Women are as physically aggressive or more physically aggressive in relationships than men. And if you think that the incidence of female on male violence is somehow balanced by women suffering more injuries at the hands of men, think again. There are widely conflicting studies on this. Some of them place women at greater risk, but many of them place men. If we examine Fibert's annotated bibliography, which covers an exhaustive amount of studies, there are many times more studies cited that show women more likely to inflict serious harm, including with the use of weapons, than are men. Are there other studies that contradict this? Absolutely. But there is a significant enough body of evidence to make three things patently clear. One, domestic violence is not a product of gender. Attributing it to one gender over the other is not only misleading, it actually hinders efforts to address the problem. Two, society is wildly misinformed about the nature, origins, and realities of domestic violence. And three, most of our legal and political handling of domestic violence is based on the myths and not the realities, leaving us to put all of our resources into half of the problem. As in so many other ways, we demonstrate a cultural tendency to remake reality, even embrace lies, when the truth about the fairer sex doesn't make them look all that fair. Now, many people of sound mind might well say, fine, let's just focus our attention on dealing with abusers and the abused regardless of sex. But to say things are not that simple is a monumental understatement. Richard Gellis is currently a dean at the University of Pennsylvania and holds the Joanne and Raymond Welch Chair of Child Welfare and Family Violence in the School of Social Policy and Practice. He is an internationally known expert in domestic violence and was influential in the passage of the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1997. Gellis wrote, regarding his work with Suzanne Steinmetz and Murray Strauss, quote, "The response to our finding that the rate of female-to-male violence was equal to the rate of male-to-female violence was not only produced heated scholarly criticism, but intense and long-lasting personal attacks. All three of us received death threats. Bomb threats were phoned into conference centers and buildings where we were scheduled to present." Now, is it just me?
All right, let's take a cut from the visual for a minute. Let's just open our ears. We must begin to understand why this abuse is happening to men in such an alarming rate, and it's only increasing. We need to start taking the time to get educated and to begin to see what's really going on. And there's something in the atmosphere. There are things not being explained, things not being talked about properly. A lot of people are laughing about this kind of stuff and making it look like it doesn't exist at all. But we need to understand why this is happening, and I'm going to cover more and more things in a later session. But right now we're going to stick to the statistics right back here at what's going on here. Let's see. Which women are most violent today? Alright, reports say that those who didn't report self-defense as a motive use higher levels of physical violence and tend to initiate aggression. The highest levels of physical violence by women who are primarily victims and women who are the primary aggressors. So both of those levels at the highest point of violence is given by these women here. A primary victim or a primary aggressor. Both of them have high tendencies to be violent. How is it that there is so little research on male victims? It's easy to answer. Initial focus is on the woman victim. Okay, that's number one. It's difficult to focus on a male victim at the same time. Women are not asked about their own use of violence. Again, men not asked about their experience of victimization because male victimization was hidden. It didn't stimulate further research. So when something is hidden and is not shown out there in the public arena, there's no need for research, right? Effective public campaigns raised awareness of female victimization, but discouraged male victimization. Fear of having to share funding with men's services. So you can see right here, it's a backwards system. The system is set up to take funds from men, and young men, older men, don't matter, men of every age. The system is designed to take money from you consistently at a higher rate. So therefore, they don't want to share funding with men's services because we're already set up. The system is set up to take everything away from us. Other ways that we have no proof, or not much proof, a little research on male victimization, is also because the media's focus is on a sensational crime by men against women. If you watch and you look at the television, you look at commercials, you look at all these things, you're going to see that the media focus is on a crime specifically that a man has done, opposed to what women are actually doing. Watch TV every day. Some of you, most of you, probably watch television every day. Everybody watches television every day nowadays. So just pay attention to that. The stereotypes or bias. Men use violence because, quote unquote, they're bigger. Women wouldn't assault a man because he's bigger. So they use all these little things to try to derail you. The tendency to ridicule men victims of women assault is very high. So when a man, this is why men don't speak up, another reason, we'll cover that another time. But men don't like to be ridiculed at any point, so they don't say much. And they make them feel like they're wrong, because you have to be politically correct, or for anything to happen. Politically correct means addressing a male's issues versus women. Politically incorrect to acknowledge male victims of female perpetrated violence. It's politically incorrect to acknowledge a male victim. Fear of discussing it, fear of getting it wrong. A lot of people are afraid to discuss it because they get threats. People get bomb threats, death threats for reporting, for being a reporter, standing on a male's behalf. And this is it's a big thing. It's a very big thing. You know, the implications of ignoring male victims of female perpetrated partner violence. Physical and psychological impact on men who are victimized. So there is a physical, not just physical, but also a psychological impact on men who are victimized, including suicide, self-harm, associated costs to the community, impact on the children in these relationships are tremendous. Service providers don't know, they have not learned how to respond appropriately to male victims because no one is training or teaching someone to respond to male victims. They're left out. Building resentment in male victims who are ignored is high. They don't know who to turn to. They're extremely frustrated. More difficult for women using abusive behavior to seek help. Why? Women who use violence for whatever reason are more likely to suffer significant injury and retaliation from their male partners. So it's more difficult for a woman using abusive behavior to seek help. Why? Because there's not much help mentioned for her. All the help is always allocated to men needing to seek anger management. But they never go to the core of what women need to seek. Men are always the perpetrators, so therefore they don't know how the system is set up to only show men as the consistent violent person, and they never show the violent side of females or women. And that's not a good thing at all. You need to learn, people need to be educated on how to help her as well, and how to draw the line from where she's beginning to abuse a man. Services don't know how to respond to female offenders. Women are at risk of further violence in the future relationships. So every time she goes from one relationship to the next, she's at risk for further violence because no one is addressing her violence. Violence starts with the mouth before it actually happens. Violence starts with the mouth. And for those out there who are actually paying attention, if you're women listening to this, some of you will know that you've been violent like this. Violent comes from your mouth. When someone says stop saying those things or stop doing this, you need to stop. You can't continue going off on a man just because you feel like it's right. Part of the other reason why, too, is because family members never ever talk to the woman about this kind of situation. They just say, oh, if this is how you feel, go ahead and say it. If this is how you feel, go ahead and act this way. The minute a man seems to act in the same manner as her, he's thrown out, he's thrown under the bus, he's shoved out, and he's left out in the cold. That's really what happens here. You need to realize there are male victims of partner violence. They, and also the children, are prevalent enough to be worthy of services specifically for them. Men are only assaulted in self-defense or in retaliation for their own behavior. Not just those two reasons. They do suffer a range of physical, again, and psychological injuries that can be serious. This is amazing. Folks, we got to look beyond the paradigm. Responding requires we recognize men's existence of abuse. For male victims of partner violence have to move beyond the paradigm that has prevailed for 40 years, some might say 60, serve to minimize or deny their existence, thus compromising our ability to respond to them. Making it look like it's not there, again, definitely helps aid abuse against men. The fact that some are so unwilling to accept the assault of men by women stems from the deep and profoundly disturbing challenges too long cherished male and female stereotypes, biasism. There's so many references out there, historical references. It's time for you to get educated on what's going on, because there's something going on. There's a reason, and behind every situation that happens in life, there is a reason for it. A distinct reason why this is happening. A distinct reason that people are not looking at it, but yet it's the biggest crisis around the globe. It's up there in the top. Besides wars, besides diseases, this is ranking at the top. The impact of family violence upon male victims comes with depression, suicidal thoughts, ideation, self-harm, attempting suicide. A man said, "I lived in terror, walking on eggshells around her for nigh on 20 years. I attempted suicide a number of times." Impaired self-concept, in particular around one's sense of manhood. Men don't even know how to be men. Men can't even be comfortable about being a man today. That is a privilege that was taken away from us. But my Bible says that was something God had given us. I know there's going to be many people discounting the Bible, but I'm going to tell you my belief on that. A man was not made to be emasculated, not being able to understand his manhood. I believe that God made him perfect, made a man to understand his manhood. But today it's thrown out. You can't be masculine today. You have to be soft. You have to seem almost girly to make it around. It was devastating emotionally and very lonely, this man says here. Usually men are put in positions where whatever happens, you're just supposed to deal with it. And I've been dealing with it for 10 years, and it was pretty heavy, and it was getting heavier to carry around anonymous. A lot of these men write these quotes or speak to you on these things, and they don't want people to know because they are so embarrassed. They are extremely embarrassed about what's happening to them, what they've been through. They don't readily voice feelings as much as women voice feelings, but it's time for men to speak up. And when you don't like something, speak up. And if there's abuse that comes with it, show proof of it, record it. Go to people that can help you. Don't stay silent and believe you have to stay in this mess. You weren't made to be walked on. You weren't made to just serve a female. You weren't made to just sit there and believe that whatever she says, you have to do it, otherwise she's going to become very angry. You weren't made that way. You were made to lead, be productive, and to be strong and a great encourager. It's a sad place right now in history. Such a time as this, there's a call for something. If you guys stay with me, you'll catch on to it later, but for now, I'm out. Well, let's go back to the other references we have here through the rest of this video.
This is a message that I'm sending out to my brothers. This is a message for men. Have you ever wondered why there is such a struggle between the sexes? I mean, have you really ever stopped to think about it? Unless you've never been in a long-term relationship with a woman, or are simply one of the many feminized men, so common today, who are controlled by sex and the women in their lives and deny that problems exist, then you are fully aware of the increasingly intense struggle between the sexes. It comes in many forms, from minor disagreements to all-out battles, but the fact is that there has always been an underlying tension beneath the surface of every single relationship that has ever existed, and it's getting much worse. In our society today, this tension has bubbled less below the surface and has become an everyday occurrence in the lives of far too many men. Every week, I speak with men who contact me for information about my research into ancient texts, and more often than not, they mention in passing that they are having trouble with their wives or girlfriends. They tell me that the women in their lives have become unruly, disrespectful, mouthy, highly argumentative, controlling, hypocritical, and so on. They complain of feelings of anger, frustration, depression, and sometimes mention physical problems that have seemed to manifest since the behavior began. And they all state that they have no idea what to do about the problem. Everything they try ends in more animosity from the women they love, and they feel like they are being beaten down incrementally on a daily basis. And if you're listening to this thinking that these men must be wimps, I need to inform you that this is absolutely not the case. I've spoken with highly respected men and their professions who hold prominent positions in their respective fields. Many of them have been decorated military personnel, firefighters, doctors, business owners, truck drivers, pastors, professors, and more. These men are not wimps. Can you relate? Do any of these things describe your situation? Does the woman in your life treat you this way? Do you feel like she is not the same person you married? When you try to mitigate the circumstances with a show of love, flowers, affection, kind words, or tenderness, does it go unreciprocated? Is the effect it has on her temporary, lasting only for a few mere minutes, like she's a leaky sieve, leaving you feeling worse, having less money in your pocket, and feeling later on like she hates you? This scenario, unbeknownst to most men, is becoming an unspoken epidemic in our society, and the men who suffer this kind of emotional, mental, physical, financial, and verbal abuse are living lives of quiet desperation, not knowing where to turn. They feel like they must take control of the situation because society dictates that a quote-unquote real man deals with his household and takes personal responsibility for his situation. But as thousands of men are discovering, that traditional way of thinking just does not work when the woman in your life is not willing to comply. But I am here to tell you that there are methods that work. There are viable answers to your questions, and there is a solution. And I'm not talking about paying a psychiatrist $150 per hour to lay out your issues, only to find out that they do not really understand what you're going through. I'm talking about gaining an understanding of why the women in our society behave this way, by learning the secrets that have been left for us in some of the most ancient texts known to man. My name is Dr. Scott McQuaid, and I am an exegete, meaning I uncover ancient languages, and I have been the featured guest on dozens of radio shows. I am also an author, known around the world for my discoveries that I've written about in my many books and papers, and I am also the founder of the Inner Circle, found at innercircle.us. I would like to share with you what I have discovered from my research into these issues, so you can finally have answers for your many questions. What I've discovered is very ancient, once forbidden secret knowledge that has been intentionally hidden beneath the ancient texts. These secrets that have been buried beneath the Sumerian, Hindu, and other texts, including parts of the Bible, and what I've discovered is a type of code that has literally never been revealed before. It is not available from any psychologist, psychiatrist, scholar, pastor, or theologian, and cannot be learned in any university or seminary setting. If you would like to know the reason why the woman in your life behaves the way she does, that are even unknown to her, then I invite you to go to innercircle.us. Your situation might have you feeling like you're crazy, because no one around you seems to understand what you're going through. But chances are you're not crazy, but have just been subjected to intense, disrespectful, hostile, and toxic behavior that is rooted in an ancient mystery that has been concealed for thousands of years, for the purposes of fostering this kind of destructive, maladaptive behavior in women at this specific time in history. With the information you'll receive at the Inner Circle, you will learn that mystery and many, many more. And in the process, be able to relax, put your mind at ease, and find rest for your weary soul. So go now and get some relief at www.innercircle.us. And I'll look forward to seeing you on the inside.
You hear what I say? Sit there looking at me like you crazy if you want to. I ain't crazy. I'm trying to tell you something.
The name change was needed to reflect the change in clientele. In 1999, less than 9% of their clients were men or boys. Last year, they made up 26% of their clients. Most victims of their partners
For women,
or parents.
on average, one man is murdered by his intimate partner every day in the U.S. That's according to the Bureau of Justice. And that was almost the case for Alfred Garcia. Yet, embarrassed by his situation, he simply put up with it.
A few months after I got stitched up, I went back to get my belongings from her, and I wanted to be back with her. And I said, well, I guess this is what love is. And I just have to learn to live with it.
Yes, that's the thing. I hate that saying there's no reason. Obviously, I'm not saying to hit a woman, you know. But saying there's no reason, I think that's crazy. When you say there's no reason, that kills any sort of examination as to how two people ended up at that place. If you say there's no reason, whoo, you cut out the build-up, you're just left with the act. How are you going to solve it if you don't figure it out? Look how awkward it is in here right now. I said you shouldn't hit a woman. I'm just saying, how come you can't ask questions? You can only ask questions about what the guy did. You can never ask about the woman. Why is that?
Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Yeah, that's right. And typically we hear of women who were victims of abuse, but that's not always the case. News 11's Nico Santos joins us now live in the studio with one very brave man.
Sexual domestic abuse crimes against women.
But one organization says it's seeing a spike in the number of men who come in for help. So much so it's even changing its name to reflect
Embrace
that
about all
change.
this is simple and designed for the simple-minded. Domestic violence is almost exclusively perpetrated by men against women. Even better, it means brutish thugs pounding the crap out of Mary Poppins for burning the toast. And here and there, that's true. But if you think it defines the problem or even comes close, you need to take Dr. Phil off your TiVo to-do list and start picking up some real books.
Dr. Owens? I think that a lot of people are trying to rationalize the behavior and to say there's some other underlying issue. But I think that any time there's actually any form of violence, it has to be taken seriously. And I do think the point that you made is very important. If Jay-Z had responded, the tweet, the Instagram would have been totally different than what we're actually seeing out here today.
In fact, when you say that issue, when you say in terms of when we say how people respond and sort of these excuses they make, Dwight, what jumped out at me, I heard people literally asking, well, we need to know what he said to her. And I said, whoa. I don't recall anybody saying, what did Rihanna say to Chris Brown?
How come you can't fucking ask questions? I just don't understand. Like, if I get bit by a rattlesnake, wouldn't you guys have some questions? Right? How did it happen? Did you not see it? Were you fucking with it? How did this snake get so mad it almost killed you? Firemen put out a fire. They don't just drive away afterwards. They sift through the debris. How did it start? Here's an oily rag, right? Look, I realize I'm coming off.
Males are actually victims of abuse. And
one second, you said 40%?
Mm-hmm. 40% of the victims of domestic violence are actually men.
Wow, I'm sure that's surprising to them, folks. Hold tight 1 second.
A few decades ago, the issue of spousal abuse, specifically of men being abused by their partners in a relationship. Unfortunately, while the situations in the daily life seem to change at a random pace, the attitudes of the public takes longer to change. And this issue has become more prominent among the immigrants and also other ethnic groups in the country. Our special correspondent, Ritu Maheshwari, was out in the field to gather public opinion, and here is what they have to say.
And do you think men could be victim of domestic violence too?
Oh yes, men are victim of domestic violence, but they just don't tell. They're very ashamed of that. And they're very macho, and they just don't tell. But yes, there is violence against men.
Yes, men can be a victim of domestic violence, and it's more about the elderly than anything else. I think that men who are unable to defend themselves are easy prey. And so you're talking about the elderly men that might be victims, or you're talking of men that don't have the confidence in themselves when they walk the streets that are victims.
I do believe that men can be a victim of domestic violence. It's, I suppose it depends on how you define the term, because there is verbal violence as well as physical violence, and I know that women can be just as verbal and physical as men can be, and a man might not feel comfortable hitting a woman, but a woman will often feel comfortable swatting their husband.
Yes, I strongly believe that men are victim of domestic violence. Little did we know that women also hit us too, so it goes both ways.
What would you think if you see a woman hitting men in public?
Well, I don't think that's proper. No, I think I would call the police if I seen it, because it's violence regardless whether it's a man or a woman. I'd probably call the police.
I would probably physically try to separate them and then notify
all of these
proper
types of
authorities.
abuse are extreme cruelty under immigration law. What immigration wants to look at is a pattern of control and manipulation. If you are a man, I know this is very hard for you to come forward to talk to someone about, let alone a woman. Everything you tell us is completely confidential, and know that you are not alone. We're here to help you.
This week by Brooke Kinsella, the actress whose brother was knifed to death 2 years ago, called for more action to tackle girl gangs. Crimes of violence by girls have risen by over 50% in recent years. Has feminism bred violent women? Connor, interesting. This has been it wasn't an academic debate, and an academic question. It has been much talked about since the 60s and 70s. But you say, if I'm right in saying that, feminism has made women, in a sense, like men, yeah?
No, I think feminism is a...
Women's rights conference in Detroit, fueling feminist outrage, even comparing the gathering to hosting a hate group.
So are the angry feminists proving they're waging a war on men by being so intolerant? Joining us now is Suzanne Venker, author of The War on Men. Suzanne, nice to see you, as always, on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so what do you make of these feminists, these professional feminists, as Tucker calls them, outraged over this group of men getting together to talk about things like finances? In fact, at this event, they had female speakers and all sorts of different races.
Oh, it was undoubtedly the most diverse group that I have ever been among at one time. It was fantastic. Males, like you said, males, females, black, white, liberals, conservatives, atheists, Christians. I mean, all united for one very specific reason, and that's to talk about the needs of boys and men, which are terribly underrepresented today. So it's almost comical to think about the lashing out that feminists did, because the actual conference couldn't have been more opposite of what they claimed. And you can actually watch the conference yourself if you want online. They have it available, so anybody could go in there and see for themselves what the conference was all about, which I actually highly recommend people do, because it was just a wealth of information by some fabulous folks.
Suzanne, why are they acting out then, if that's the case?
Okay, so the biggest divide between what's called the MRAs, the men's rights activists, and feminist activism is really very simple, and that is that feminists blame all social ills, all the problems that we have, really, especially regarding marriage and the family, education, jobs, and the like, on the patriarchy. You know, whenever something goes wrong, it's the man's fault, and it's the system, and it's all messed up. When men's rights activists come together to truly address these problems, all they're interested in is just solving the problem. And these people that were on the panel at this press conference the other day are in the trenches in various arenas, and they are doing great work to solve problems completely irrespective of ideology. So if you're married to an ideology that says the patriarchy is real and that women are always the victims, and you never are able to look at women in any kind of critical way and admit that they can do wrong too, you can't solve these problems regarding boys and men.
Well, and also, Suzanne, it's a whitewashing of gender. I got slammed here when I mentioned on the show a few months ago that actually genders are different. Some liberal blogs wrote about me saying that. Outrageous that there are differences between men and women, biological differences that we should be embracing, not trying to whitewash, and that's what these feminists want to do.
Those are the two things. That they're stating that there's no differences between women and men, and the fact that the patriarchy is alive and well and, out to get you, so to speak, and we have to, in order to achieve equality, redo our entire system. So the point is, anytime someone tries to speak out and address the real issues that revolve around the male-female relationship, marriage, family, domestic violence, by the way, goes both ways. People don't know that because feminists own the dialogue when it comes to these topics. The assumption is that women are always victims and men are the perpetrators. That is absolutely statistically false. And that's what just one example of what this conference shows.
Where can people go and watch that conference, by the way? Is it posted online somewhere?
So if they go to, the conference was put on by A Voice for Men, and they've become pretty much the dominant men's group globally. And we had people there from Australia, by the way, the UK, from Maine to California to the South. And it's called A Voice for Men. So if you go to avoiceformen.com, everything's there and you'll find it. And you can make up your own mind what you think about men's rights and what's going on here, because we feel that it was a very pivotal
that exists. Do we ignore the violence against men by women? Do we not take that seriously? And
I mean, those questions are hopefully rhetorical, but yes, we don't take it seriously. We ignore it, and I think, what was his name? I forgot his name. The British dude do the cartoons. He made a great video where he pointed out how even on television, if something happens to a female, like there's speculation, there's conversation, even if it's art, like it's just a TV show or movie, but if a guy gets hit by a female, it's funny and we laugh about it, it's just jokes. But one thing I would disagree with Roland about is when the situation happened with Chris Brown and Rihanna, I still ask those same questions. I wonder, what did she say or what did she do to have that altercation take place? Because there's two sides to every ass whooping. So, I ask the same questions. But there you have it. Jay-Z got whooped out by his baby mama sister in the elevator, and everybody thinks it's all funny games. But had it not go down like that, had he retaliated and defended himself, it would have been a whole different story. It is what it is. And I guess I give props to Roland, even though I don't agree with most of what he says. He actually brought this to light. Let's see if any other stations will do the same and point out the differences in how we view violence between when it's a woman hitting a man.
From my own findings, because as I said, I run a few girl programs in and around the UK, and in my own findings, I found a lot of reasons, whether it be rebelling against, the inequalities, whether it be alcohol, alcohol and drug misuse is much more violent women up north than in London, to be honest. And also things like PMT gets neglected. There are a lot, and I'm being very serious, because a lot of young ladies who I've worked with, are not actually aware of their menstrual cycle. 2 weeks before their menstrual cycle, most of these young girls are extremely violent. However, and they don't know this, but when we monitor it, and I literally any young lady I work with, I do a monitor.
A lady here wants to join.
You are so immature, I can't take it. You are so immature, I can't take it.
Pussy. Fucking pussy.
Oh, wow.
Not okay to mistreat girls. Not okay to mistreat girls.
How old are you?
I don't care.
You're the biggest on the planet.
Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? You can't assault people.
channel, both of them specialize in the issue of domestic abuse. And Angela, I'm going to go to you first.
What about this issue that I'm talking about? When you look at this reaction to this Beyonce, Jay-Z, Solange video, folks are joking about it. Folks are cracking on Jay-Z. Oh my goodness, you know, what did Solange say to him? But this does speak to a double standard in our society where we don't take it as seriously when a woman hauls off and hits and kicks a man. If this was reversed, or even if Jay-Z had forcefully responded in defending himself, he would be ripped to shreds and there would not be the same reaction.
That's correct. And our societal views on domestic violence in
Right
general,
now, I'm curious about whether you support gay marriage.
You're borderline being a little bit rude. That's what I want to talk about. I'm not being weird. I'm
Being
being a
very
little
disrespectful to
rude.
these ladies. You shouldn't talk to women like that. You shouldn't talk to women like that. You shouldn't talk to women like that.
They never address how women argue, which I think is a core of a lot of that shit. You know, and I got to tell you something, man. Like, I never knew how women argued, but after 20 years of losing every significant battle in a relationship, I finally figured out how they argued. I'm going to tell you something. I'm starting to turn this franchise around.
The feminist movement in this country promised women once that they could have it all: a successful career, financial success, and a family. But now, a controversial new study by the University of Pennsylvania suggests that women are less happy than men, despite all of the progress that women have made since the 1970s. Inez Ferre has our report.
You've come a long way, baby.
Women have come a long way in the last 35 years, but despite a movement that brought so much progress to American women, their happiness has dropped relative to men over the last 3 decades.
The reason we find that surprising is that if you look across society, there's been a lot of social change that shifted things towards women.
The data was studied by 2 researchers at the University of Pennsylvania who say a happiness gender gap is emerging.
We look across age groups, across marital status, across labor force participation, across whether you have children or not, and we find that there's not a particular group of women who've become less happy, but rather all women across all of these categories have become less happy over time relative to men.
The analysis does not conclude why women's happiness has declined, but it doesn't rule out, among other reasons, whether more opportunities to succeed have increased a woman's expectations on herself, or whether the pressures of their modern lives have come at the cost of happiness. Some feminists question the study, including the measurement of happiness in general. Others say the happiness gap is no surprise because of how hard women are expected to work outside and inside the home.
And this study was done to see why Americans in general are feeling less happy. The study found that the declines were driven by the trend among women. Men's happiness has essentially remained flat or slightly increased, Lou.
Well, that is a troubling and I would say even surprising report, but such an important finding, and I've asked Kitty Pilgrim to join us here too, such an important finding. Why would there not be an examination of why? That is the critical question to be asked here, is it not?
That's what the researchers are saying. They're saying, you know, we're just publishing these facts. Now more research needs to be done as to why this is happening.
Is it your sense that question has been answered in any previous study, or?
No, Lou, I haven't. I'm actually quite surprised by this report because career opportunities are very extensive, and I actually don't know why that would turn up, and I think why is the actual critical issue in this whole point. If you're coming up with a result that's surprising,
it's absolutely surprising, and we'll find out why. By golly, thanks very much. Appreciate it, Inez. Inez Ferre.
Female pedophiles. There's a great deal of controversy about this. In fact, when I brought up the issue that women could sexually abuse children, I was vilified. I was cast out of the sisterhood. I was no longer a good feminist because sexual abuse had to be under the guise of male power. And if I had a significant number of women who were sexually abusing children, and I knew about these women, then that messed up the male power thing. And surely if women were going to abuse children, then they had to be doing it under the thumb of a man. A man had to be telling them to do it.
Do women tend to only commit child abuse if there's a man involved as well?
No, no. In over 75% of the cases, the women acted completely alone. Women who sexually abuse children like to have jobs where they're around children, nursing, teaching, daycare, things like that. I mean, most parents don't think twice about leaving their children in care of a woman. They do now think twice about leaving their child in care of a man. Again, I think that's wrong.
Well, I did not know this, but men are feeling feminized, undervalued, frustrated. A brand new survey showing more than half of the guys out there say that women are making the rules. They just got to follow them. My next guest says that has got to change. It is time for Renaissance. He is, of course, Mark Rudolph, and Lee Sweel disagrees.
So for those of you screaming for me to quit picking on women and take gender out of the equation, that is precisely what I'm doing, and what I'm asking you to do once and for all. If you really believe that all violence is bad and shouldn't be tolerated, then here's what you can do to prove it. Write Vice President Biden and tell him to seek an end to the Violence Against Women Act, the legislation he authored that allocates billions to women victims but leaves men totally out of the picture. Men are, after all, injured by domestic violence too, 835,000 of them per year in America alone. Start holding shelters and social services to account when they have no real programs designed for men. Their failure to do this is institutionalized sexism and needs to go. Confront police and prosecutors for their actions. Men who call police for help when attacked by their partners are more likely than not to be the one arrested regardless of the circumstances. Victims should be helped, not arrested, incarcerated, and stigmatized. Be sure to express your objections to and boycott media outlets and corporations like Pepsi and FedEx that use men getting abused as a sight gag in their advertising. When you see or hear a public service announcement that says something like a woman is abused in her home every 15 seconds, realize that it is actually a public deception, a convoluted half-truth based in blind bigotry and callous indifference to the victimization of men. Those are a few good beginnings. But you can best start by simply and publicly acknowledging what so few seem to know. Domestic violence has nothing to do with what sex you are. It never has. Disinformation is a poor way to address social ills. In fact, it just breeds more of them.
But interspersed, we watched 3 episodes. It was all about how being a male in charge makes your rating go down, and how being a feminist is how you survive in the jungle. And I was just thinking about, no matter what show it is, dramas, reality shows, cop shows, movies, there are messages in them. Anti-gun, anti-liberty, anti-male. Just everything is brainwashing, basically.
You pointed out the hypocrisy or the double standard, I guess, with the situation with Jay-Z, his baby mama sister, and he had Elevator, and he pointed out how, you know, everybody's making jokes and it's funny, and people ask silly questions like, you know, what did he say to her? Like, that matters. I even had a dude tell me at work, he was like, you know, you know, because I was pointing out how, you know, if it was the other way around, if he would have Chris Bound her, it would have been a different story. You know, even though he was retaliating, he like, it didn't hurt him. So I guess there was a narrative too. A chick's supposed to just sit there and let her hit you and not respond. But in his situation, he did the right thing because it was on camera, and he has a lot more to lose.
Every case is handled like that Rihanna one, where they just say the guy's a piece of shit, fuck this guy, blah blah blah, send him to jail, and then they never ask anything about that. You know, I'm not saying he should have done it, but I'm just saying. Just saying, dude, in your heart of hearts, what do you think was going down before that happened? You think she was just sitting there going, oh my God, Baskin Robbins, you want to get some ice cream? And he fucking, you know? Or do you think maybe they were having some epic end of the relationship fight and some crazy shit was being said? Maybe she was screaming in his ear some crazy female shit like, oh, fuck all your friends, I don't give a fuck. Maybe that's why I sell more albums than you, motherfucker. Right? To be fair, she could have just been sitting there going, I need a tissue. Do you keep those in the glove box? Oh my God, I'll bring my out.
And really, when I do turn 40, I'm still gonna be a bad bitch. So what is your point? Whatever. Keep it moving.
You know what I'm saying? Be real, cuz. This is a new day. You know what I'm saying?
I will you up. I'm just completely in shock. I can't believe this mother did that.
You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
I don't even know if I can even speak to him again. I never in a million years would imagine he would ever have done something like that.
You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Most times there wasn't even a man in the premises. So, you know, the excuse. And it's interesting about us as women, because we're quite willing to accept that we are a superior breed and that we do everything right, but quite unwilling to accept that we could do anything quite as horrible as this.
People were trying to make an excuse to say, well, if he said something to her, well, then I then understand why she would respond that way.
Well, understanding why
Angela,
she might respond.
Angela, go ahead.
Understanding why she may have responded that way to something he possibly said to her doesn't make it legal or right.
Right.
So it doesn't justify the response.
Right, but my point is, I saw a significant number of people constantly making that point, and I'm going, really? I'm going, how? I'm going, you guys are going to seriously rationalize this whole deal there, and so that's why I brought up the Chris Brown Rihanna deal, because that wasn't the case there, Dwight. And I said, look, if you're going to rationalize one, rationalize the other.
So at the end of the hour, they come to the logical conclusion. They're like, there is no reason to hit a woman. There is no reason to hit a woman. And I was just like, really? I could give you like 17 right off the top of my head. You could wake me from a drunken stupor, I could still give you like 9. Dude, there's plenty of reasons to hit a woman. You just don't do it. But to sit there and suggest that there's no reason. Dude, the level of ego behind that statement. What are you, levitating above the rest of us? You're never annoying? Women, how many times have you thought about slapping your fucking guy in the head this week? There you go. Every day. You didn't do it, right? Oh, dude, it drives me nuts. There's no reason. There's no reason. Really? No reason? How about this? You marry a girl, you fall in love, you buy her a house. You go to work every day paying off the house. You come home one day, she's banging the next door neighbor, hands you divorce papers. You got to move out, sleep on a futon, and still pay for that house that she's going to stay in. No reason. I'm not saying you should do it, but there's plenty of fucking reasons in that arc of a story. No, that's the thing.
Domestic violence is very hard to detect. It could be verbal or physical. Lots of people are unaware that there are various resources and help available to the victims. When we come back...
So you didn't do anything wrong here?
I don't feel like I did, no. I mean, he took, you know, he took my love and the vows that I made to him when we got married and totally tromped all over that for the first year of our marriage. Disrespected me, disrespected my home, disrespected our marriage.
Okay, I understand why you feel justified for putting him in jail. I'm just asking if you ran a red light in putting him in jail. Did you make statements that weren't true?
I may have said that there was punching or hitting. And there was not that to my recollection,
you
but there was.
Maybe say it. You either said it or you didn't. You either said he hit me and punched me, or you didn't. Did you say?
I did.
You did.
I did.
And did he hit you and punch you?
No.
Okay.
Not to my recollection.
You knew it wasn't true when you said it, though. I mean, let's be honest.
Yes.
You knew it wasn't true when you said it, right?
Yes.
So you made a conscious decision to embellish the story. And that's a lie. I'm not saying this isn't the biggest creep in the world and you shouldn't divorce him before dark today. I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying that he's not mentally abusive, emotionally abusive, verbally abusive, and even physically abusive. He may deserve to be under the jail. Whatever. I'm not saying that you should put up with that at all under any theory whatsoever. What I'm asking you is, did you or did you not file a false police report when you said that he punched you and hit you, and you knew at the time that he did not?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a long way of coming around to saying, yeah, I lied to the police and got put in jail.
I don't think so. It's a public park. It's a public park. I'll stand here. I don't think so.
You're being threatening.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll stand right here.
And we're going to calling the police.
Go ahead. Call the
Because you're being
police.
threatening to this.
I'm not threatening anybody. It's all on film. It's all on camera.
And he threatened he was going to attack. And he threatened he was going to attack. And he threatened he was going to attack.
When news of the Santa Barbara killings broke, gender activists seized on it as a teachable moment about the war on women. There were more than 1 million tweets at the hashtag #YesAllWomen. Well, what did we learn? Coming up next on The Factual Feminist. Now, many of the activists at the hashtag #YesAllWomen insisted that no one was out to demonize men. And I'm sure that was true of many of the contributors. But consider this infographic that went viral once it was posted on Upworthy's Tumblr. You say not all men are monsters? Well, imagine a bowl of M&Ms. 10% of them are poisoned. Go ahead, eat a handful. After all, not all M&Ms are poison. Well, where to begin? First of all, what does that 10% figure represent? I mean, are they saying 10% of men are murderers or rapists? And what's the evidence for that? Are they talking about all men, American men, college men? Or as one blogger asked, men who play ukuleles or Martian men? And by the way, I wouldn't eat a single M&M if I knew that 10% or 1% or 0.01% of them were poisoned. But what's most wrong about this graphic is that it deploys the classic logic of bigots. I mean, think of saying, well, X% of African Americans or Muslims or Jews or Hispanics, X% of them are dangerous, and we just don't know which ones. So therefore, let's treat them all as suspects. Well, congratulations, Upworthy. You've promoted the same logical fallacy behind Jim Crow laws or racial profiling. Basically, the message to women is to treat all men as if they're poison. Now, I think men will be forgiven for finding the whole thing quite insulting. What's most upsetting to me, as the factual feminist, is that the shooting was an occasion for just an avalanche of misinformation about women and violence. Sarah Cliff at Vox rushed into print 8 facts about violence against women everyone should know. Well, let's consider some of those facts. Number 1, Most women experience physical abuse in their lifetime. The most recent national survey of American women found that a slight majority, 51.9%, reported experience physical violence at some point in their lives. Well, this sounds like American women are living in a state of siege. Vox does give the source, but my guess is that the author assumed no one checked it out. I'm not sure she looked at it herself, because here's what it says. And stay with me, this is a mouthful. 51.9% of surveyed women and 66.4% of surveyed men said that they were physically assaulted as a child by an adult caretaker and or as an adult by any type of attacker. An estimated 1.9 million women and 3.2 million men are physically assaulted annually in the United States. Now, Vox failed to inform readers that the study counted as physical assault, grabbing, pushing, and shoving. Also, according to Vox, 1 in 10 women sustained a head or spinal injury as a result of physical assault. But if you read the study, you find that what it actually shows is that among all adult victims of physical assault who sustained an injury, both male and female, 1 in 10 sustained head and spinal cord injuries. But Vox made it sound like every woman has a 10% chance of sustaining a head or spinal injury from a physical assault. Now, the truth is bad enough. Why hype it up with a misleading headline? Now, I've been studying research on violence against women for years, and I am sorry to report that much of it is untrustworthy. Now, critics sometimes accuse me of trivializing the problem of violence against women by questioning the research. In fact, I question the research because the problem of violence against women, against children, against men in the United States is just too serious to be left to advocates and careless journalists. Truth is on the side of compassion. Falsehood is no friend. I want to thank the viewers of this series for your many insightful remarks and conversations in the comment section. And please keep up the good work. And if you have suggestions for further episodes, let me know. And if you found this video useful, please subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Thank you for watching The Factual Feminist.
Solutions are not simple. Having counselled many families affected by emotional terrorism, both Paul and I can tell you that getting through the denial of such women is a challenge. Often the other victims in the family defend her with miscalled chivalry, or worse. It can be extended with a few handy laws to encompass the worst and most varied game of all, the let's you and him fight game, in which the local police are called in to inflict severe damage to the victimised family. The father is taken away, often in handcuffs, leaving the children completely defenceless. The judges refuse to see Mama for what she is and dispossesses Daddy altogether.
Let me extend an olive branch then, okay? I realize that there's some animal guys out there, okay? Horrible guys, you know, have a rough day at the factory, come home, tuna casserole, and just start swinging, all right? I'm not trying to say that those people don't exist. I realize they exist. They should be buried underneath the prison, okay? So if I can admit that, ladies, can you at least admit that every ass-kicking doesn't just fall out of the fucking sky? Really? Even hockey has 2 minutes for instigating, right? They understand that some back and forth happened before that shit, you know?
A conference about this, a huge conference. People came, dotted themselves in the audience, and tried to disrupt it. They were yelling that, you know, this, why was I paying attention to women? It wasn't women. I was taking the attention away from men. And it was just, it was absolutely strange and very sad, because it was like, don't tell me this information, even if it's true, because I don't want to hear it.
That getting through the denial of such women is a challenge. Often the other victims in the family defend her with miscalled chivalry.
This is how
family
they argue,
members
as far as I can tell. All right? If they're right, they argue the point. And they stay on point and make sure you stay on point until you're down on your knees apologizing, begging for forgiveness. All right? No problem with that. Totally respect it. But here's the thing. If they're wrong, they go rogue. They go off-road. They start thinking of shit you're sensitive about. Maybe you don't get along with your dad. And in their head, they just start concocting this evil statement. Totally designed, this desperate Hail Mary attempt to make you so fucking mad, you just call them a cunt. That's what it is. And cunt trumps all the bullshit they did to start the argument. Now it's not about that. Well, that's no reason to call me a cunt. And then that's it. You're in this room now, right? And they won't hook up with you for a couple of days. Who cares?
Immigration wants to look at is a pattern of control and manipulation.
Now, some of y'all ladies look a little disappointed because you used to church beating up men. God didn't create them to be beat up. He created them to bless you.
Believe that there will be a brighter day. Situations tend to weigh us down, and it's easy to let them steal your joy away. It's always when you are the closest to almost getting through. Change seems far away.